Good morning. Indigenous people make up nearly 14% of the country's population. Their socioeconomic status places them among the country's poorest. They have significantly higher rates of illiteracy, unemployment, and poverty than the general population. In remote areas with limited access to essential services, IP settlements have higher rates of morbidity, mortality, and malnutrition. There are 110 major indigenous groups in the Philippines. Most indigenous people rely on upland-swidden agriculture. Over the years, most of these traditional cultivation and fallow areas have degraded. Migrant farmers have introduced unsustainable lowland commercial farming practices and endangering their survival. The lack of legal recognition of traditional lands also restricts their ability to freely conduct livelihood activities and access other natural resources within their communities. To protect the rights of indigenous tribes, the government implemented the Philippines Indigenous People Rights Act of 1997, or called IPRA law. What is exactly the IPRA law? Has anything changed in helping indigenous tribes, or has nothing changed at all? Is it simply implemented by not followed, and does the government not emphasize it? The Indigenous People Rights Act, or IPRA, which was passed 10 years later, guaranteed indigenous peoples the following rights to their ancestral domain. First, right of ownership over lands, bodies of water traditionally occupied by them, sacred places, traditional hunting and fishing ground, and improvement introduced thereon. Second, right to develop land and national resources, subject to existing property rights within the ancestral domain. Third, right to stay in their territories except when they have given their free and prior informed consent, and subject to the Philippine Power Eminent Domain. Fourth, right to be resettled in sustainable areas should they be displayed through natural catastrophes. 5. Right to regulate the entry of migrants. And 6. Right to safe and clean air and water. 7. Right to claim part of reservation. And lastly, right to resolve the land conflicts in accordance within the customary laws of the area where the land is located. Are these rights being upheld by organization? Since the Arroyo administration took office in 2001, IPR Monitor has documented 120 extrajudicial killing of indigenous peoples. Numerous killings have occurred across the country, with the Lumans of Mindanao and the Igorots of the Cordillera frequently targeted. Among the victims are NGO workers, local government officials, church workers, and members of indigenous leadership structures who have defended collective rights against government projects and policies. In addition, the systematic extrajudicial killing of indigenous people and the continued threats against indigenous leaders have had negative social effects. This incident have increased conflicts, fear, and mistrust among indigenous communities, eroding indigenous system of cooperation and solidarity, making them more vulnerable. The killing have weakened the indigenous people's movement for recognition and respect for their collective rights. This is one of the proofs that the law is not followed. The indigenous people rights are supposed to be protected by the law. Although they apply to the general public, they do not apply to wealthy and powerful politicians and business associates. Some big business corporations, backed by their elected cronies and puppets in government, are working to seize control of indigenous people's forests, minerals, water, land, and resources to amass enormous wealth for their shareholders. The indigenous tribes are still subjected to racism, stigmatization, and other forms of discrimination. They are singled out for discrimination because of their cultural differences, language, or even physical characteristics. This is one of the contemporary issues that has remained unsolved for quite some time. There are also Filipino who deserve to be treated equally, despite holding different religious, and cultural beliefs. Thank you.